Have you ever made a decision in a state of just absolute sheer panic?
Oh, definitely.
Right. You are staring down this massive problem, the pressure is mounting, the stakes feel impossibly high, and you just grab the very first solution that pops into your head simply to make that awful discomfort of uncertainty go away.
Just to relieve the pressure.
Exactly. We have all been there. You, me, everyone listening to this right now. We spend so much of our lives reacting to impulses, navigating complex situations with incredibly limited information, and really just hoping for the best.
Yeah, flying blind a lot of the time.
But what if there was a rigorous way to train your brain to stop operating on impulse? Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're exploring a brilliant book from 2026 by Thierry Minkowski titled Penser avec l'échiquier.
Or thinking with the chessboard.
Yes, Thinking with the Chessboard. And our mission today is to extract the wisdom of a 1,500-year-old game and apply it directly to your real life. We're going to prove that you do not need to be a chess grandmaster or, even to know how the knight moves to master the art of high-level strategic thinking.
Which is a really crucial distinction to make right at the start. The text we are analyzing today goes out of its way to avoid being a manual for tournament champions. It's not about memorizing openings.
Not at all.
Instead, it treats the 64 squares of the chessboard as a highly controlled laboratory for the human mind.
I love that framing. A laboratory.
Right. The board is presented as this safe, contained space where we can actually test how we observe the world, how we adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, and perhaps most importantly, how we manage our own psychology when faced with profound uncertainty. It is really an exploration of cognition disguised as a game.
Okay, let's unpack this by going all the way back to the very origins of the game, because understanding where it comes from fundamentally changes how you view the board.
It really does.
The book shares this ancient Indian legend about the invention of chess, which was originally called chaturanga.
Chaturanga.
Yeah, and that word represented the 4 divisions of an ancient army: the infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. So the legend claims that a wise sage presented this brilliant new strategic game to his king.
A simulation of war, basically.
Exactly. And the king was so absolutely mesmerized by it that he asked the sage to just name his reward, anything he wanted.
And the sage's request is, well, it sounded almost insultingly humble at first.
Right. He asks for 1 grain of rice on the first square of the board, 2 grains on the second, 4 on the third, doubling all the way across the 64 squares.
And the king's reaction to that request is just a perfect metaphor for how human beings struggle to comprehend exponential growth.
We are so bad at it.
Terribly bad at it. At first, the reward sounds trivial, a few grains of rice. But as the king's mathematicians start calculating the progression, they hit a terrifying realization.
Because it escalates so fast.
It does. Doubling those grains 64 times creates a mountain of rice that is vastly larger than the entire kingdom's agricultural reserves. In fact, it's more rice than has ever been produced in human history.
Which is just a staggering visual.
It is. The progression seems painfully slow at first, but the compounding effect ultimately produces staggering, almost infinite complexity. And that combinatorial explosion is the true essence of the game. You start with simple finite rules, but within just a few moves, the number of possible board states actually exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe.
Which is just a mind-bending statistic to try and wrap your head around.
It really is.
So from 6th century India, this game of infinite complexity travels westward to Persia, where it picks up the name Shatranj. And there's a really cool linguistic evolution here that the book points out.
Oh, the etymology of checkmate.
Yes. It's in Persia that players began using the phrase Shahmat, which translates literally to "the king is defeated" or "the king is helpless." And over centuries of global trade and cultural exchange, Shahmat slowly mutated in the European tongue into the phrase that immediately signals finality in our culture today: checkmate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, modern chess, with its fast-moving queens and sweeping bishops that were finalized in 15th century Europe, is essentially an ongoing trans-historical dialogue.
A dialogue crossing centuries.
Exactly. When you sit down at a board today, you are actively participating in a conversation between 2 minds that crosses centuries and cultures. The geometric boundaries are exactly the same, the mechanics of the pieces are exactly the same, but the human minds interacting with that geometry are constantly bringing entirely new perspectives, new anxieties, and new problem-solving frameworks to the table.
And that idea of problem-solving frameworks brings us directly into the core of the source material. The text breaks down the cognitive process into what Minkowski calls the 5 disciplines of a decision.
This is where it gets highly practical.
Very practical. This is where we start moving from abstract history into highly actionable advice for your daily life. So let's look at Discipline 1 and Discipline 2, which are observe and identify. The author points out a glaring flaw in how beginners play. They play way too fast.
Always.
They see a shiny attack, a quick little victory, and they immediately jump at it. The book argues that to truly observe, we have to stop fixating on individual pieces and start looking for invisible tensions.
Invisible tensions.
Wait, map that out for us. What does an invisible tension actually look like on the board versus, say, in a corporate strategy meeting?
Sure. So on the board, an invisible tension is the unstated influence a piece exerts simply by existing on a specific square. It is a line of attack that hasn't been activated yet, or maybe a crucial square that is secretly protected from halfway across the board by a sniper-like bishop.
So it's about what could happen, not just what is happening.
Exactly. Beginners only look at the pieces that are actively moving. Masters look at the empty space and the potential energy contained within it.
The potential energy.
Right. And if you translate that to a corporate strategy meeting, observing invisible tensions means looking past the loudest person in the room.
Or the most obvious short-term revenue metric.
Yes. It means identifying the unsaid political dynamics, the shifting market forces that aren't quite tangible yet, or even the structural dependencies between two departments that no one is openly discussing.
And observing doesn't just mean analyzing your own side of the table either, because Discipline 2 is identifying the opponent's threats, which demands a really high level of active empathy.
Empathy is a strategy.
Yeah. You have to actively put yourself in their shoes and ask, what is it that they are trying to achieve? What vulnerabilities do they see in my position that I am completely blind to?
We so often view empathy as this soft emotional trait.
We do. But in high-stakes environments, empathy is a ruthlessly effective strategic tool. You simply cannot make a sound, objective decision if you are entirely locked inside your own perspective, only considering what you want to happen.
Which is incredibly hard to resist, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because truly stepping into another person's perspective requires taking on extra cognitive load. You have to think for two people. And that brings us to Discipline 3 and Discipline 4, which the text categorizes as generating candidate moves and calculating consequences.
Candidate moves.
Yes. A candidate move is, quite simply, an option. The mandate here is that, in life, just as on the board, you must absolutely refuse to take the first viable option that comes to your mind.
Force yourself to pause.
Exactly. If you are listening to this on your commute right now and you are facing a massive decision at work or at home, ask yourself, have you genuinely generated multiple paths forward? Or are you just following an impulse because it feels like the path of least resistance?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text delves deeply into why we hate generating those alternative paths. It introduces this concept of the psychological burden of calculating the future.
It is a heavy burden.
It is. When you generate 3 different candidate moves, you then have to imagine the specific consequences of each one. You have to project your mind forward, anticipating how the market or your spouse or your competitor will react to your move.
And then how you will need to react to their reaction.
Exactly. You are essentially trying to map out a reality that hasn't happened yet. And the human brain hates that level of ambiguity. We want certainty, so we shortcut the process. We grab the first idea that seems merely good enough just to relieve the agonizing pressure of calculating the unknown.
And that agony of calculating the unknown leads perfectly into the final discipline, Discipline 5, the irreversible decision.
The point of no return.
Exactly. You can analyze the invisible tensions, you can empathize with the other side, you can generate a dozen brilliant candid moves, and you can forecast the future until you are mentally exhausted. But eventually, your hand has to leave the board.
You have to let go of the piece.
You have to let it go. And the moment you break physical contact with that piece, the decision is irreversible. The abstract realm of planning violently collides with the concrete realm of reality.
Releasing the piece is profound. It reminds me of deploying a massive new product launch or signing a binding contract. You review the data 100 times, you run the beta tests, you obsess over the marketing copy, but eventually you have to push the button and release it into the wild.
You have to act.
Right. The text makes it clear that a flawless, perfect analysis without actual execution is completely useless. You have to learn to act decisively amidst inherent, unresolvable uncertainty. You have to accept the terrifying fact that your analysis might be totally flawed, but you move anyway, taking full responsibility for the new reality you've just created.
And taking responsibility for that new reality forces you into what the author beautifully terms the silent dialogue.
The silent dialogue, I love this part.
It's fascinating. The premise is that chess is not merely the act of moving carved wood around a checkered grid. It is a complex, nonverbal conversation. The pieces are your vocabulary. Every single move you make is a direct question posed to your opponent.
Like, how will you respond to this new constraint?
Precisely. A defensive move is a statement of stabilization. You are telling the other side, I see what you're trying to do and I am securing my boundaries. Conversely, an aggressive move is an interrogation. It asks, do you have the structural integrity to withstand the threat I've just introduced?
But that dialogue doesn't always have to be a cutthroat zero-sum interrogation, does it?
Not at all.
Because the source material spends a surprising amount of time discussing the pedagogy of play. Specifically, what happens when you are sitting across from someone with significantly less experience. We typically assume the goal of any game is to crush the opponent as efficiently as possible to prove your dominance.
To win at all costs.
Right. But the author flips that completely, suggesting that how you handle a weaker opponent reveals your true mastery of the board.
A truly skilled strategist understands that a power imbalance is an opportunity for cultivation, not just domination. When playing someone less experienced, a master can deliberately let the position breathe.
Let it breathe.
Yes. They will intentionally avoid a crushing, immediate tactical victory in order to allow the other person to explore the board, to test their own flawed candidate moves, and to feel the natural consequences of their strategic errors in real time. It transforms the board from an arena of conquest into a shared, collaborative space of learning. You are using your superior position to teach them how to think.
I love that reframing of power. But the text also drops a pretty harsh truth here. The person sitting across the table from you isn't your only opponent, and often they aren't even your most dangerous opponent.
No, they usually aren't.
You are locked in a vicious, ongoing battle with your own nervous system. You are constantly managing your own mind. You have to fight your physical fatigue, your impatience to just get the tension over with, and those sudden, dangerous spikes of overconfidence the second you think you have a slight advantage.
Which raises an important question. How often do our most catastrophic mistakes in life stem not from a lack of raw intelligence, but from a total failure of emotional regulation?
Wow. Probably most of the time.
Right. The text argues that mental stamina and inner clarity are far more critical than computational power. The board acts as a flawless mirror of your internal state. If you are angry, you will overextend your pieces. If you are tired, you will miss an obvious threat. If you are arrogant, you will underestimate the opponent's resilience.
So you have to constantly check yourself.
Constantly. The discipline is to cultivate a quiet, deeply attentive presence, recognizing those emotional impulses as they rise up, but refusing to let them drive your hand.
And that requirement for inner clarity brings us to some of the highly advanced real-world strategies outlined in the book, starting with the tension between strategic patience and the clock.
Patience is so hard today.
It really is. We live in a culture that is utterly obsessed with speed. We demand quick fixes, flashy quarterly wins, the viral moment, the overnight disruption, but the text argues for a much quieter, slower approach. Letting the position mature.
Letting it mature.
Yeah. Instead of forcing a dramatic, risky breakthrough, you focus on compounding tiny, almost imperceptible advantages.
And letting the position mature is perhaps the most difficult strategy for modern professionals to adopt because it completely lacks immediate gratification.
No one is cheering for you.
Exactly. It involves moving a knight to a marginally better square or advancing upon just one space to subtly restrict an opponent's mobility. In isolation, these tiny adjustments look completely inconsequential. They don't generate applause. But returning to our legend of the rice grains, these micro-improvements compound over time. Eventually, those small, patient maneuvers create an overwhelming structural advantage that makes the final victory inevitable.
And that patient, methodical approach naturally leads into the author's point about simplicity. In popular culture, we tend to idolize the trope of the complicated, tortured genius.
The beautiful mind trope.
Yes. We picture the master executing some deeply convoluted 15-step master plan that no normal human could possibly comprehend. But the text absolutely shatters that illusion.
What's fascinating here is how effectively the book debunks the myth of the flashy genius. When you study the games of true masters, Their best moves are rarely these incredibly complex, highly fragile tricks. They're almost always the most natural, simple, and harmonious moves available on the board.
Supple and harmonious.
Yes. When you deeply understand the visible tensions we talked about earlier, the correct path often feels entirely obvious and unforced. And from a purely strategic standpoint, simplicity is infinitely more powerful than complexity because it vastly reduces your margin for error.
That makes perfect sense.
A highly complex, convoluted plan requires 12 different variables to go perfectly right in exact sequence. It is brittle. A simple, harmonious plan is robust. It can absorb shocks and adapt to surprises.
Okay, but to properly discuss high-level strategy, we do have to talk about sacrifices. Because when most people think of a chess genius, they picture a dramatic, movie-style moment where a player throws away their queen for the sake of a theatrical checkmate.
The big cinematic moment.
Exactly. But the book unpacks the true functional meaning of a sacrifice, and it has nothing to do with drama or showing off. It is a highly calculated economic trade.
A true sacrifice is the deliberate, willing forfeiture of tangible material, something you can easily count and measure, like a bishop, a rook, or a large chunk of capital. You give that up in order to acquire something entirely intangible.
And tangible leverage.
Right. By giving up that piece, you might be buying critical time, you might be permanently ruining the structural integrity of your opponent's defense, or you might be securing control over the center of the board. The real-world application here is profound. The ultimate strategic power move is having the discipline to surrender something concrete and measurable in the short term, to secure an intangible, highly leveraged advantage for the long term.
Think about a startup deliberately burning through millions of dollars in capital that's tangible material. And they do it not to turn an immediate profit, but to aggressively acquire user market share, which is an intangible long-term positional advantage. You lose the cash, but you gain the leverage.
It's a classic sacrifice.
But what happens when that sacrifice fails? What happens when your brilliant strategy collapses, you blunder, and suddenly you are staring down a lost position? The advice here is incredibly gritty. Keep posing problems.
Keep posing problems. A bad position is not over until the king is actually captured or the physical clock runs out of time. We must remember that human beings are playing the game, and human beings are inherently fallible.
They make mistakes.
Always. They get exhausted, they get distracted, and when they have a massive advantage, they get notoriously careless. If you find yourself in a losing position, your job is no longer to execute a master plan. Your job is simply to make the act of winning as difficult, irritating, and cognitively exhausting as possible for your opponent.
Just drag it out.
You keep setting small traps. You intentionally complicate the board. You force them to calculate every single variation. If you make them think hard enough for long enough, the pressure will eventually cause them to make a mistake. Resilience is not passive endurance. It is active, relentless complication.
And sometimes the ultimate act of resilience is deliberately steering the game toward a pad. That's the French term the author uses for a stalemate.
A stalemate.
The section on the psychology of the stalemate was revelatory to me. So, a stalemate occurs when a player has absolutely no legal moves left on the board. They are completely trapped. But their king is not currently under direct attack, meaning they are not in check. Because they cannot make a legal move, the game instantly ends in a draw.
It is the ultimate paradox of the rules.
Yeah.
You are entirely dominated, your resources are depleted, and you have nowhere to go. But because you are not actively in check, you don't lose.
It's wild.
It is. The lesson drawn from the stalemate is a masterclass in strategic maturity and ego suppression. When a total victory becomes objectively, mathematically impossible, your strategic goal must pivot immediately. You have to completely redefine what success looks like.
Success is no longer winning.
Exactly. Success is no longer crushing the opponent. Success is pure survival. Success is engineering a draw at a certain defeat. Being able to adapt your objective to the harsh reality of your circumstances without letting your ego demand a glorious, impossible victory is the hallmark of a true master.
So, what does this all mean? How do grandmasters actually synthesize all of this? Observing invisible tensions, calculating candidate moves, managing their emotions, looking for sacrifices, and plotting stalemates, all in a matter of seconds during a high-speed blitz game. Is it just raw, freakish calculation speed?
It seems like it would have to be.
Right, but the text says no. It comes down to intuition, but it completely strips away the mystical aura around intuition, defining it instead as the rapid recognition of motifs.
We culturally romanticize intuition as this magical, unexplainable gut feeling bestowed upon a lucky few. But the author explains that intuition is actually a highly mechanical process. It is simply the brain instantly recognizing motifs or complex patterns that it has cataloged from thousands and thousands of past experiences.
Just matching patterns.
Yes. This heavily mirrors the neuroscience concept of chunking. A grandmaster doesn't look at the board and see 32 individual pieces that they have to consciously calculate. They see a single, unified structure, a chunk, that they've encountered and solved hundreds of times before. Their brain bypasses the slow, heavy lifting of the prefrontal cortex and instantly retrieves the stored solution. That is why the correct move literally reveals itself to them.
Yeah.
Intuition isn't magic. It is crystallized, internalized experience.
If you think about it, it's the ultimate goal of learning any discipline, moving from slow, agonizing conscious thought to rapid, unconscious mastery. To summarize this incredible journey for you, we've seen how the 64 squares of a chessboard serve as a profound, unforgiving mirror of the human condition. It trains us to pause and observe the invisible tensions that dictate our environments before we react. It forces us to actively map out another person's desires through strategic empathy. It teaches us that true brilliance lies in robust simplicity rather than fragile complexity. And it proves that even when your position seems entirely lost, if you have the emotional regulation to stay at the table, keep posing problems, and redefine your success, you can survive.
It really provides an incredibly rigorous framework for navigating the ambiguities of living. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as we conclude.
Let's hear it.
A significant portion of the text relies on the existence of the physical chess clock. In a tournament, the clock is the ultimate enforcer. It is the external mechanism that violently forces a player to transition from the safety of endless reflection into the vulnerability of irreversible action. When your time is up, you must move, or you lose.
The ultimate pressure.
Yes. But in real life, many of our biggest, most consequential decisions, leaving a stagnant career, ending a toxic relationship, or finally launching that project you've been designing for years, these decisions do not have a physical clock ticking down next to us. There is no external buzzer forcing us to act. So the question I want to leave you with is this. If the board teaches us that infinite reflection without action is completely useless, what invisible clocks do you need to actively set in your own life right now to force yourself to stop calculating and finally make your move?
Wow. An invisible clock. That is definitely a framework I'm going to be applying to my own lingering decisions this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away from this conversation ready to keep observing the invisible tensions, planning your candidate moves, and playing your own game of life with a little more strategic clarity and a lot more purpose. Until next time, set your clock and make your move.